She traveled 1,000 miles for a new life, promised a home and a husband. But when Eleanor Vance stepped off the stagecoach, she found a dusty, silent porch and 7 pairs of wary eyes. There was no husband. This wasn't the fresh start she paid for. It was a trap. But her decision to stay would be an act of defiance that would change a town forever. The October wind carried dust and dead leaves across the empty yard as Eleanor stood frozen beside her single trunk. The advertisement had promised a thriving farm in Montana Territory. A widower named Thomas Hartley needed a wife. She had sold everything she owned back in Philadelphia to afford the journey. Now she faced a weathered house with peeling paint and broken fence posts. The door creaked open. A boy, maybe 14, stepped onto the porch. His clothes were dirty. His dark hair stuck up at odd angles. Behind him, 6 smaller faces peered through the doorway. The youngest couldn't have been more than 4 years old. The boy's voice was hard and flat. "Your letter came too late. Pa died 8 days ago. You should turn around and go back where you came from." Eleanor's heart dropped into her stomach. Dead, the word echoed in her mind. She had $23 left. Just enough for a ticket back east if she left immediately. The children stared at her with hollow eyes. Their clothes were torn. Dirt streaked their faces. They looked like nobody had cared for them in days. The boy's name was John. He introduced the others with sharp, quick words. Mary was 12, trying to hold everything together. Samuel was 10, quiet and watchful. The twins, Lucy and Lily, were 8. Benjamin was 6. Little Rose was 4. They had been living on stale bread and water since their father died. No relatives, no neighbors close enough to help. Eleanor looked at their faces. She saw fear mixed with desperate hope. The smart choice was to leave, take her ticket money and run. But she remembered being 12 years old herself, alone after her parents died of fever. She remembered the terror of not knowing what would happen next. She picked up her trunk. John stepped forward to block the door, thinking she was leaving. Instead, Eleanor said the words that would change everything. "Move aside, John. I need to see what food you have in the kitchen." The kitchen was a disaster. Dirty plates piled in the wash basin. A pot of something gray and congealed sat on the cold stove. The pantry held almost nothing. A bag of flour with weevils, some salt, a few sprouting potatoes. Eleanor rolled up her sleeves. John watched her suspiciously as she built a fire in the stove. "Why are you staying? We have no money. The farm is failing. Pa owed debts." Eleanor found a somewhat clean pot and started peeling the potatoes. "Because somebody needs to make supper. And tomorrow we'll figure out the rest." That first meal was simple. Potato soup with the last good vegetables from the dying garden. But the children ate like they hadn't seen real food in a month. Little Rose fell asleep at the table, her spoon still clutched in her tiny hand. Eleanor carried her to bed, tucking a threadbare blanket around her small body. The next morning, Eleanor counted her money again. $23. She could leave. She should leave. Instead, she gathered the children and walked the 3 miles to town. She needed supplies, and the children needed to be seen as cared for. The town of Cedar Falls was small and harsh. The general store smelled of tobacco and pickled fish. The shopkeeper, Mr. Dalton, looked Eleanor up and down with obvious doubt. Behind her, she heard whispers from 2 women examining fabric. "That's the mail-order bride. Came for Thomas Hartley. Fool girl doesn't know when to cut her losses. Those children will be in the orphanage by Christmas. Mark my words." The woman speaking was Mrs. Catherine Morse, head of the church auxiliary. Her voice carried the weight of someone used to being right. Eleanor's cheeks burned, but she kept her focus on Mr. Dalton. She spent $20, flour without weevils, salt pork, beans, coffee, soap, thread and needles. When Mr. Dalton tallied the bill, he shook his head. "This won't last 7 children a month." Eleanor met his eyes steadily. "Then I'll need credit." The store went silent. Mrs. Morse actually laughed. Mr. Dalton's face turned red. "Credit? You aren't even legally married to their father. You have no claim here." Eleanor lifted her chin. "Those children need food. I'm staying to provide it. If you won't extend credit, I'll find another way." She left with her purchases, the children trailing behind her like ducklings. John carried the heaviest sack without being asked. On the walk home, Mary slipped her small hand into Eleanor's. It was the first sign of trust. That night, Eleanor used precious flour to make biscuits. She showed Mary how to get them light and fluffy. She taught Lucy and Lily to darn socks. She helped Samuel with his reading. John continued to watch her with suspicious eyes, waiting for her to give up. Days turned into weeks. Eleanor established routines: morning chores before breakfast, lessons at the kitchen table. She found an old McGuffey reader and taught the younger ones their letters. She discovered that Samuel had a gift for numbers. Mary could sew almost as well as a grown woman. The twins had been caring for the chickens all along, keeping the eggs coming even after their father died. But John remained distant and angry. He did his chores but spoke only when necessary. One night, Eleanor heard him telling Samuel that she would leave once winter came. No woman stays through a Montana winter, not for kids that aren't even hers. The test came sooner than expected. Benjamin developed a fever in early November. His skin burned hot. He couldn't keep food down. Eleanor had $3 left and no medicine. She made willow bark tea from the old tree behind the house, remembering her mother's remedies. She stayed up 3 straight nights, cooling his fever with wet cloths, spooning broth between his cracked lips. John found her on the 3rd night, asleep in the chair beside Benjamin's bed, still holding the boy's hand. Benjamin's fever had broken. John stood in the doorway for a long moment, something shifting in his young face. The next morning, John brought her coffee without being asked. It was the first kind thing he had done. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Morse arrived for her inspection. She fully expected to find chaos and neglect, ammunition for her petition to have the children removed. Instead, she found a spotless kitchen, children in mended clothes doing their lessons, Eleanor teaching Rose her numbers while bread rose on the warming shelf. Mrs. Morse's pinched face showed her disappointment. She left without the satisfaction she came for. But Eleanor knew this was just a small victory. Winter was coming, and they had almost nothing. The blizzard hit in early December. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in 3 hours. Wind screamed through gaps in the walls. Snow piled against the windows until the house was dark even at noon. The roof began to leak, then pour, icy water streaming onto the floor. They were down to their last sack of flour. The firewood was running low. Eleanor had been rationing food for weeks, giving her portions to the children, but now there wasn't enough to ration. They moved all the beds into the main room near the stove. Eleanor and John worked side by side, stuffing rags into the wall's gaps, moving pots to catch the leaks. On the 2nd night of the storm, with the wind howling like a living thing, Rose began to cry from hunger. They had 1 cup of flour left. No milk, no eggs. The chickens had frozen in their coop. Eleanor mixed the flour with water and a precious pinch of salt, making a thin gruel. John stopped her as she began dividing it 7 ways. "You eat too. You're part of this family now." It was the first time he had acknowledged what she had become to them. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. On the 3rd day, the storm broke. The sun came out brilliant and harsh on the white landscape. They had survived, but barely. Eleanor knew they needed help or they would starve. She made a decision. She would walk to town, though the snow was waist-deep in places. She would beg if she had to. But when she opened the door, she found a miracle. Mr. Dalton's sledge sat in the yard, loaded with supplies. The shopkeeper himself was unloading sacks of flour and beans, slabs of bacon, and even a precious bag of sugar. Behind him, 3 other men from town were stacking split firewood against the house. Mr. Dalton's weathered face was kind. "Mrs. Henderson told us how you nursed her nephew Benjamin through the fever. Tom Hartley was a good man. He would want his children cared for. You've proved yourself, Mrs. Hartley. Your credit is good with me." She wasn't Mrs. Hartley. She had never married their father. But in that moment, Eleanor became something more. She became the mother those children had wished for on countless lonely nights. Winter passed slowly but steadily. Eleanor taught the girls to knit with yarn unraveled from old sweaters. John and Samuel learned to trap rabbits. They made it through together. When spring came, they planted a garden twice the size of the old one. The children worked beside Eleanor, no longer 7 orphans and a stranger, but a family. By the next October, everything had changed. The farm was tidy and productive. The children were healthy and happy. Even Mrs. Morse had to admit that Eleanor had worked a miracle. At the harvest dance, people called her Mrs. Hartley with genuine respect. John, now 15 and several inches taller, asked Eleanor to dance. As they moved around the floor, he spoke quietly. "I'm sorry I tried to make you leave. I was scared you would go anyway, And it would hurt worse if we had started to love you. Eleanor squeezed his shoulder. You couldn't have driven me away, John. From the moment I saw you all on that porch, you were mine to protect. That night, as Eleanor tucked Rose into bed, the little girl whispered sleepily that she loved her mama. Eleanor kissed her forehead, remembering the frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach a year ago. That woman had lost everything she thought she wanted, but in its place she had gained something infinitely more precious. The town that had expected her to fail now watched her with admiration. The woman they had dismissed as a fool had become the strongest person they knew. Her revenge wasn't dramatic or violent. It was the simple act of succeeding against every odd, of building love where others saw only burden. Eleanor proved that families aren't always made by blood or marriage certificates. They're made by choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. They're made by midnight vigils beside sick beds and shared cups of thin gruel during storms. They're made by young boys learning to trust and little girls finding safety in a mother's arms. Some would say Eleanor was trapped by circumstance, but she knew the truth. She had chosen this life, these children, this love. And in choosing them, she had finally found herself. The mail-order bride who arrived to find no husband had become something far more important. She had become the mother of 7 children who needed her desperately, and in saving them, they had saved her too. If Eleanor's story of quiet strength moved you, let us know in the comments below. Remember that the greatest acts of courage often happen in the smallest moments, in the daily choice to stay and love when the world expects you to run. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories of incredible resilience and the families we choose.